I was grabbing coffee with an old colleague recently, a really sharp guy, an engineer by trade.
Oh, yeah.
And he spent, I don't know, the first 20 minutes just meticulously breaking down the specs of his new electric vehicle.
Of course.
He was obsessing over battery efficiency, drag coefficients, all the data sets.
Yeah.
And he kept saying, how important it is to optimize performance and follow the evidence.
Sounds like a classic engineer, logic above all else.
Exactly. To anyone listening, you'd think this is the ultimate rational thinker, a man governed purely by logic. But then the conversation shifted. We started talking about the origins of our species. Basic biology, geology, the age of the earth, and the mood it snapped. The guy who was demanding peer-reviewed studies for his car tires suddenly put up this defensive wall.
He shut down.
Completely. He literally waved his hand, cut me off, and said, I don't need to read about that.
Yeah.
I have my faith. And just like that, all his curiosity just evaporated.
Wow. That's a stunning moment.
It was such a contradiction. I mean, here's a man holding a smartphone, a device built on quantum physics and centuries of rigorous scientific trial and error.
Right.
Using it to defend a worldview written by, Bronze Age nomads who didn't know where the sun went at night.
It felt like watching someone standing next to a high-performance race car, keys in hand, but refusing to get in because he prefers to ride a horse.
And insisting the horse is faster.
Yeah.
That moment made me realize something really uncomfortable. Most of us aren't actually logical. We just play a game where we use facts to protect our comfort.
And that profound moment of resistance, that's the absolute core of what we're trying to figure out in this deep dive. It's the stunning contradiction in human rationality.
Right.
How can we simultaneously be these, incredibly evidence-driven creatures? We can land rovers on Mars and at the same time be so deeply susceptible to belief systems that just collapse under the slightest empirical scrutiny.
It's the ultimate human puzzle, isn't it? It's the same brain. The same brain is doing differential equations one minute and believing easily disproven folklore the next. How does that contradiction even exist inside our own minds?
That is our mission today. We are going to investigate the actual machinery of human thought. We're going to try and understand how these internal cognitive systems and the external social dynamics lead us to prioritize comfort.
And coherence.
And coherence, yes, over rigorous, verifiable evidence. We'll unpack this in 3 key areas. First, that internal logic bypass the cognitive biases, how the brain saves energy.
Okay.
Second, the social mechanics of resistance, so identity and the fear of loss. And finally, the real-world consequences, looking at how these flaws can, completely destroy professional and organizational decisions.
So let's unpack that internal machinery first. When we look inside the human brain, there's this incredibly useful metaphor that seems to explain exactly why we're so prone to this logic bypass.
You're talking about the dual system metaphor, System 1 and System 2.
That's the one.
And that's really where the internal psychodrama begins. You have System 1, which is your intuitive, fast, automatic, and completely effortless system.
So that's doing things like recognizing a face or catching a ball.
Exactly. Understanding simple sentences, reacting to a sudden noise. It's the secret author, as some have called it, of so many of the choices and judgments you make. It's just constantly generating impressions and feelings.
It's the default system. It's just always running in the background, making these rapid-fire assumptions.
It never turns off. And then you have System 2. Now, this is the brain's meticulous accountant. It's the deliberate, slow, effortful, conscious part of you.
So that's the one I use if you ask me to, say, multiply 17 by 24.
Right. Your pupils will dilate, your heart rate will increase slightly. System 2 has to mobilize enormous attention and energy to solve that. It constructs thoughts sequentially, it monitors your behavior. It's hard work.
But the critical limitation isn't really System 2's capability, is it? It's the cost. It's the fact that it's, frankly, just notoriously lazy.
It is remarkably indolent. I love that word for it. System 1 requires 0 effort. It's just happening. System 2, though, requires continuous exertion, and the whole setup is governed by what we call the law of least effort.
Our default mode is to just avoid mental overload.
Absolutely. System 2 only really steps in when System 1 runs into serious difficulty or gets surprised. Like if you hear a cat bark, System 1 goes, wait, that's not right, and it flags System 2 to come in and figure out what's going on.
And the cost of running System 2 is substantial. We talk about mental energy, but it's not some infinite resource, is it?
No, and this is a critical point that gets overlooked. Mental effort relies on a shared, limited pool of energy. It demands attention and self-control, sometimes called cognitive bandwidth. This is demonstrated so vividly with the idea of ego depletion.
Right, ego depletion. So if you have to force yourself to do one hard thing,
like resisting a donut, or focusing on a really tedious form.
You're literally using up the energy you need for the next challenge.
Precisely. So if I spend an hour aggressively controlling my emotional response during a tense meeting, my ability to solve a difficult budget problem right after that is genuinely reduced.
It's not a moral failing, it's a resource issue.
It's a resource issue. The evidence suggests this pool of energy, metaphorically, is shared. When people are cognitively busy, like, say, you have to memorize and repeat a long string of digits, their system, too, is tied up. It's depleted.
And in that state?
In that state, they're far more likely to make selfish choices. They're more likely to use superficial or stereotypical judgments. They're much more likely to choose a piece of chocolate cake over a fruit salad.
Huh. I've been there.
We all have. When you loosen the hold of that monitoring system too, you get predictably less rational and less controlled behavior. Our default setting is designed for conservation, not for constant vigilance.
That makes the failure of rationality feel so much less like a personal flaw and more like a physical constraint.
It is.
And a classic example of this fiction, where System 2 knows the truth, but System 1 just insists on its own impression, is the Miller-Lyer illusion.
Oh, that's the perfect demonstration of the hierarchy. You have these two lines. They are objectively the exact same length, but one has arrows pointing out and one has arrows pointing in.
And the one with the arrows pointing out looks so much longer.
Drastically longer. And here's the key. Your conscious, effortful System 2 can get a ruler. It can meticulously measure the lines. It can know with absolute certainty that they are equal. But you still see one as longer. You can't turn it off. You can't command System 1 to change its impression.
So the only thing you could do is learn to distrust your own eyes.
Exactly. You have to learn that in specific context, you must deliberately mistrust your automatic impressions and invoke System 2 for verification. But that takes effort. That takes training.
So, okay, System 1 is running the show most of the time. And its main goal isn't analytical precision. It's just building a tidy, coherent story out of everything it sees.
That's the engine of what we call associative activation.
Associative activation and embodied cognition.
Yes. Associative activation is that automatic, incredibly rapid, and often unconscious process that links ideas together. One word, one image, one idea triggers a whole cascade of related ideas in your brain.
It's like a web of connections firing off under the surface.
A massive web, forming an instantaneous and coherent pattern. And, crucially, this pattern formation isn't just a cerebral thing. It's physical.
Right, it's embodied. We think with our bodies.
We genuinely think with our bodies. There's a famous example. If you are primed by the word vomit in a clinical study.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. Your body will react with what's called an attenuated replica of a reaction to the real thing. You might wrinkle your nose, your stomach might clench slightly. That visceral, physical, emotional response is completely intertwined with your cognitive interpretation.
It's hard to think rationally about something if your body is already recoiling from it.
It's nearly impossible. And the marvel of this priming shows us just how easily our actions and our emotions can be hijacked by concepts we aren't even consciously aware that we're processing.
The experiments on this are just wild.
They're amazing. Think about the one where students were exposed to elderly-themed words like bald, gray, or wrinkle, while they were doing some other seemingly unrelated task.
Yeah.
Then, when those students walked down the hallway to the next part of the experiment, researchers secretly measured their pace.
And the ones who were primed with the old age words.
They walked significantly slower. They unconsciously adopted the pace associated with the age group they had just been thinking about without any awareness of it.
That's the pure ideomotor link. The idea directly influenced the action.
It did, and it works both ways. If you ask students to walk around a room at, say, 1/3 their normal pace, they are then subsequently much quicker to recognize words related to old age, like forgetful or lonely. The action primes the thought.
So it's a two-way street. The body influences the mind influences the body.
It's a constant feedback loop, all in the service of coherence. And this can get incredibly specific, which we see in the realm of moral cleansing.
This is the idea that the way you cleanse yourself has to match the way you sinned.
It's bizarrely specific. In one study, they subtly induced participants to lie to an imaginary person on the phone.
Okay.
Afterwards, when asked to evaluate some products, that group showed a distinct preference for mouthwash over soap. But The group who was induced to lie via email,
They prefer the soap.
they preferred the soap to the mouthwash. The automatic emotional response dictated a cleansing agent specific to the body parts used in the lie, the mouth for speaking, the hands for typing.
System 1 needs everything to be tidy and consistent, even in its absurdity.
And this whole process dictates our internal state of what's called cognitive ease. If System 1 is running smoothly, we feel good, things feel right, and we are highly, highly reluctant to mobilize that vigilant, effortful System 2.
Because ease feels good. Ease feels safe.
Ease is the brain's signal that everything is fine, no need to redirect attention, no need to mobilize effort. But here's the danger. This ease creates a powerful illusion of truth.
The illusion of truth.
The most reliable way to make people believe a statement, whether it is completely factual or demonstrably false, is through frequent repetition.
Just repeat it over and over.
Yes. Familiarity, which is induced by repetition, is simply not easily distinguished from genuine truth by System 1. If you've heard it before, it feels true. This is the mechanism behind, well, all advertising.
All advertising, propaganda, political messaging.
Throughout history, it works.
And it's not just the content, it's the presentation of the information. The fluency of it dictates how believable it is.
Entirely. Belief is heavily biased by presentation fluency. If you're writing marketing copy, use vibrant colors, use high-quality paper to maximize the contrast. We even see this in the mechanics of all things, fonts.
Okay, this is the one that really blew my mind. The cognitive reflection test.
Right, the CRT. It's a set of problems designed to trick System 1 into giving a fast, intuitive, but incorrect answer.
So when students took this test in a normal, easy-to-read font,
90% of them made at least one mistake. Their System 1 jumped to the easy, wrong answer.
but when the font was barely legible, all blurry and hard to read, inducing cognitive strain, what happened then?
The mistake rate plummeted to 35%.
What?
It's completely counterintuitive. The difficulty of reading served as a warning sign. It was like a little alarm bell for System 2. The mental friction forced System 2 to mobilize and double-check the impulse from System 1.
So making it harder to read actually made it easier to think straight.
That's it. Which is a crucial finding. If you want people to really scrutinize your message, make it slightly painful to process. Don't make it too easy.
That is fascinating. The strain itself acts like an alert. And we see this play out in the financial markets too, right? With cognitive ease.
Absolutely. There are studies showing that companies with easily pronounced names or stock symbols, like, say, KAR, tend to perform better, at least initially, than ones with tongue-twisting names, like RDO.
Just because it's easier to say.
The ease of pronunciation induces cognitive ease, and that subtly suggests a more favorable attitude. System 1 misinterprets that fluency as a sign of future potential, and it can influence those early investment choices.
So we've established that the whole system is designed for coherence and speed, not for effortful deep analysis. And when System 1 gets that coherent story, it just stops looking.
It does, and that premature stop is what leads to all of our major shortcuts and biases. The entire process is built to jump to conclusions.
Which is summarized perfectly by that acronym, WYSIATI.
WYSIA. What you see is all there is.
I love that.
It means that System 1 constructs the most coherent, satisfying story it can using only the information that's immediately available. And crucially, it almost never considers what might be missing.
It doesn't see the gaps in the data.
It doesn't even know there are gaps. If the story is internally consistent, the system grants it a very high subjective confidence, regardless of how complete the evidence actually is. It just fills in the gaps with inference.
And this feeds directly into something we've all experienced, the halo effect.
The halo effect is the tendency for our initial impressions to just increase the weight or the positive interpretation of everything that comes later. If you like the first thing you learn about a person,
Or a company or a product.
you grant everything else the benefit of the doubt. You just knit it all into one single tidy narrative.
And there was a perfect, if professionally terrifying, example of a professor grading essays based on this effect.
Yes. So the professor would grade all of one student's essays consecutively. If that first essay was really strong, that initial positive impression created a halo for the next essays.
So the student got the benefit of the doubt on vague statements in the second essay.
Exactly. And the result was that the exact same pair of subsequent essays would get drastically different final grades, purely based on the reading order. The initial salient impression just overwhelmed the neutral evaluation of the later content.
Which brings us back to confidence. WYSIATI is why we are so consistently overconfident, isn't it?
It's the root of it. Our feeling of high confidence reflects the coherence and the completeness of the story we've built in our mind.
Not the quality of the evidence.
Not at all. It is not a reflection of the actual quality or the amount of supporting evidence out there in the world. A concise, clear, but totally misleading story will always feel more confident than a complex, nuanced, but accurate one.
Okay, now we have to talk about how System 1 handles uncertainty in statistics, which is, well, it's almost always systematically wrong because it's so desperate for a tidy narrative.
It's terrible at it.
Let's start with the representativeness heuristic.
Right. This is our tendency to judge the probability of something by how much it resembles a pre-existing stereotype. And in doing so, we systematically ignore the relevant statistical facts, what we call the base rate.
And the classic thought experiment here is the problem of Steve.
Yeah.
Is he a librarian or a farmer?
That's the one. So you're told that Steve is very shy and withdrawn, he's meek and tidy, and he has a passion for detail.
Okay, sounds like a librarian.
Your mind instantly matches that description to the librarian stereotype. But this is the critical failure point. The vast majority of people completely ignore the statistical base rate.
Which is?
In the U.S., there are far, far more male farmers than there are male librarians. So even if every single male librarian fits that description perfectly because of the sheer numbers, it is still statistically far more likely that any randomly selected meek and tidy man is, in fact, a farmer.
But we ignore the numbers and go with the story.
We rely almost exclusively on resemblance. We neglect the base rate.
And our minds really struggle with these raw, abstract statistical base rates unless we can somehow weave them into a story with a cause. This is the fascinating distinction in the cab problem.
Exactly. So if you're simply told that 85% of the cabs in a city are green and 15% are blue, your mind struggles to integrate that raw fact into its judgment. It's just too dry.
It's just a number.
It's just a number. But if you were instead told that the drivers of the green cabs cause 5 times as many accidents as the blue cab drivers.
Now you have a story. The green cab drivers are reckless.
You instantly form a stereotype of them as reckless madmen. That causal story, that green drivers are dangerous, is easily fitted into a narrative. And suddenly, that base rate information matters a great deal to your final judgment because it provides a reason.
So if we want people to pay attention to statistics, we have to transform them into a narrative of cause and effect.
We have to, because System 1 absolutely abhors randomness. If we were using Bayesian thinking, we'd merge the specific evidence, like a witness IDing the cab, with the statistical base rate. But System 1 prefers to just discard the statistical fact if it doesn't support the story it wants to tell.
Okay, so let's move to the second major shortcut, the availability heuristic. This is about assessing frequency by how easily examples come to mind, saliency over true frequency.
And this one is profoundly influenced by the architecture of how we search our own memory. A simple example is the letter K problem.
Is K more likely to be the first letter in a word or the third letter?
Right. And it's just much, much easier and therefore more fluent to search your memory for words that begin with K.
Kangaroo, kitchen, kettle.
Exactly. Because of that search fluency, we unconsciously exaggerate the frequency of K as the first letter, even though it appears far more often in the third position.
The ease of recall makes the event seem more frequent, which is why dramatic, recent, or vividly reported events loom so large in our collective imagination.
And this is where it moves from a trivial word game to a major issue of public policy. The media and our digital environment just constantly fuel availability.
A shark attack gets more coverage than deaths from heart disease.
Infinitely more. Frequently mentioned, dramatic topics, celebrity deaths, terrorism, natural disasters, they populate the mind. And this leads people to assess the importance of issues by how easily they can retrieve an example. This ignites what we call an availability cascade.
The cascade being a self-reinforcing feedback loop.
Precisely. A dramatic, even if rare event gets huge media coverage. Public emotion is heightened. Then politicians, responding to that public fear and media pressure, take some kind of hasty regulatory action.
And that action validates the original fear.
It does. It validates the fear, which leads to more coverage, and the loop continues. And this leads to an exaggerated fear of that specific, often very small risk, which causes what we call probability neglect.
We're vividly imagining the tragic numerator, the one story we saw in the news, and completely ignoring the denominator, the actual extremely low frequency of the event.
That's the perfect way to put it. It's the mechanism behind incidents like the Alar scare in the 80s. Public panic over a pesticide on apples led to a complete ban, even though the scientific evidence suggested the risk was minuscule compared to common alternatives. The cost was massive and totally disproportionate to the actual danger.
Because our minds are just terrible at dealing with small risks.
We either ignore them completely or we give them far too much weight, precisely because of the emotional salience driven by availability.
Finally, in this section, we have to talk about anchoring, the sheer power of irrelevant numbers to work our judgment.
Anchoring is when our estimates stick incredibly close to an initial value, even if that value is completely arbitrary and irrelevant.
That initial value serves as an anchor, and we don't adjust far enough away from it.
Our adjustments are always insufficient. It's an absurdly powerful effect, and it's mandatory knowledge for any negotiator.
And the absurdity was just perfectly demonstrated in that classic Wheel of Fortune experiment.
So subjects were asked to estimate the percentage of African nations in the UN, but first they spun a completely arbitrary wheel that was rigged to land on either 10 or 65. The number was explicitly random.
It had nothing to do with the question.
Nothing. Yet the people who saw the number 10 on the wheel had an average estimate of 25%. The people who saw 65, their average estimate was 45%.
That is a huge difference, a 20 percentage point shift from a random number.
It's shocking. Even in high-stakes decisions, this initial meaningless data point fundamentally flaws the outcome. And it happens through two different mechanisms.
Okay, what are they?
The first is a deliberate process of adjustment by System 2. If the wheel lands on 65, your conscious mind starts adjusting downwards, but being lazy, it stops prematurely, it gets tired and stops too close to 65.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the other way?
The second is an automatic priming effect by System 1. Just seeing the high number 65 causes your associative machine to activate memories compatible with high numbers. It subtly biases your subsequent search for information toward confirming a high estimate.
So whether you're haggling in a bazaar, setting the listing price for your house, or making the first offer in a corporate acquisition,
that initial anchor is a weapon. The key takeaway is that you are anchored the moment a number is on the table. And if the stakes are high, you have to use conscious, aggressive effort to combat that initial figure.
We've established that System 1 is fast, lazy, and jumps to conclusions to create these coherent stories. But now, let's explore why those stories, especially when they're challenged by evidence, are protected with such ferocity.
The emotional resistance.
The emotional resistance is key. Let's start with the affect heuristic. This is the emotional tail wagging the rational dog.
I love that phrase. The affect heuristic explains why we love a tidy, non-contradictory world. It means that people let their likes and dislikes determine their beliefs about the world.
So if I like something, I want to believe it has high benefits and low risks.
And if you dislike it, you want to believe it has low benefits and high risks. If I like nuclear power, I will believe it's safe and efficient. If I hate genetically modified organisms, I will believe they are dangerous and unnecessary. We simplify painful trade-offs into these tidy packages.
And that study on technology opinions demonstrates this perfectly. It shows that our rational system 2 just acts as an apologist for our initial feeling.
That is the core mechanism. Researchers surveyed people's opinions on various technologies. When participants read arguments that extolled the benefits of, say, chemical plants, they automatically rated the risks as being lower.
Even though they got no new information about the risks.
None at all, and vice versa. If they were told the risks were low, they suddenly developed a more favorable view of the benefits. System 2 is not operating as a skeptical scientist here.
It's being a defense lawyer.
It's a defense lawyer, seeking consistency with the emotional preference that was generated by System 1.
And that emotional drive to protect what we like brings us to prospect theory. This just fundamentally changed how we understand choices that involve risk, especially around gains and losses.
Prospect theory absolutely shattered the classical assumption that people make decisions based on their final state of wealth.
Right. It's not about how much I have in total.
It's about the changes relative to a reference point or the status quo. We think in terms of immediate gains and losses relative to where we are right now. And the mathematical representation of this is the S-shaped value function.
Can you just walk us through that S-shape?
Sure. The function is kinked right at the reference point, at the status quo. For gains, it's concave, which means you experience diminishing sensitivity. The difference between winning $100 and $200 feels huge. The difference between winning $1,000 and $1,100.
I'd say much less.
Much less. But for losses, the function is convex. And this is the critical part.
The asymmetry. The defining feature of that S-curve is the sheer asymmetry between the two sides.
That's it. That is loss aversion. The response to losses is about twice as steep as the response to gains. We use a coefficient of roughly 2 to 1.
So the psychological pain of losing $100 is twice the pleasure of gaining $100.
And that asymmetry is arguably the most fundamental conservative force that governs human decision-making.
And this asymmetry dictates what's called the fourfold pattern of choices, which explains some seemingly contradictory behaviors, like why we both buy insurance and play the lottery.
Yes, this is where you see the irrationality manifest in really specific ways. So let's break it down.
Okay.
First, with high probability gains, people are risk averse. They'd prefer a sure $800 over an 85% chance of winning $1,000. They'll accept less than the expected value to guarantee the win.
That makes sense. Lock it in.
Second, and this is critical, with high probability losses, people become risk-seeking. If you're facing a sure, painful loss like a $9,000 settlement,
You'd rather gamble.
you'd rather take a high-risk gamble, like a 90% chance of losing $10,000, than accept the sure, slightly smaller loss. The certainty of the loss is just too psychologically painful. This is why a defendant with a weak case is so tempted to just fight on.
Okay, what's the third part?
Low probability gains. Here, people are risk-seeking again. This explains the lottery. The tiny, tiny chance of a massive win is overweighted relative to its true probability. It makes the ticket psychologically appealing even though the expected value is terrible.
And the last one.
Low probability losses. Here we become risk averse. This is why we buy expensive insurance policies. We overweight the extremely small risk of a catastrophic loss like a flood and will pay far more than the expected value just to eliminate the worry of that tiny, terrible possibility.
So our minds are just essentially terrible at handling probability, whether it's small or large, especially when there are emotional stakes.
It creates a predictable pattern of irrationality. We fear catastrophic losses way too much, and we chase long-shot gains way too hard.
And this loss aversion is the engine behind why we cling so fiercely to what we already have, which leads to the endowment effect.
Exactly. The endowment effect states that we value what we own, and the loss of which is painful, much more than what we don't own, where gaining it is just pleasurable. This was so famously demonstrated in the mug experiment.
Right. Tell us about the mugs.
Researchers gave out coffee mugs with the university logo on them to half the participants. They became the sellers. The other half were the buyers.
Okay.
The average selling price that the sellers demanded was about double the average buying price the buyers were willing to offer.
Double.
Double. The psychological pain of giving up the mug they now owned was twice the pleasure of acquiring the cash to buy it. It's a perfect match for that 2-to-1 loss aversion ratio. Simple ownership instantly transforms the object's perceived value.
What's so fascinating are the exceptions, though. Experienced traders, for instance, they don't show an endowment effect.
Right, because they're trained to think like a trader. They frame their decisions broadly, focusing on future transactional value and profit expectations, not narrowly on the sentimental value of just owning something right now. Their mental accounting is different.
So it's a learned skill to overcome it.
It is. The poor also act differently, but their situation is tragic. For them, all choices are between losses. Spending money on good A is the certain loss of being able to buy good B. When you're constantly faced with multiple losses, the dynamics of risk and preference just get completely distorted.
So if loss aversion is this fundamental, it must be the core reason for so much cultural and social stability or stagnation.
It is the ultimate conservative force. It favors minimal changes from the status quo. Loss aversion is what keeps us stable in our careers, our neighborhoods, even our marriages, because the pain of disruption, of giving up the present certainty, it just far outweighs the potential uncertain gain of a new option.
Any change, no matter how promising it sounds, is first evaluated as a potential loss.
A potential loss of the current comfortable status quo.
And this leads us directly to the external dynamics of resistance. We're getting back to my engineer colleague now, the tribal dimension. If the status quo includes my deeply held religious or political beliefs, then challenging those beliefs is perceived not just as a factual disagreement,
but as an existential loss. And that's where social identity theory, or SIT, comes in. It provides the sociological context we need. Our identity isn't purely an internal thing. It is profoundly derived from our thoughts and feelings about belonging to a specific social group.
We're social creatures.
Deeply. And people inherently seek what's called positive distinctiveness for their in-group. They need their tribe, their group, to be seen as smart and morally righteous and correct.
So when a scientist comes along and presents empirical evidence that contradicts the foundation of that identity, whether it's about origins or climate science or a political narrative, the brain doesn't see a fact. It sees a threat.
It sees a direct threat. If accepting the evidence means you have to admit that your in-group, your family, your community, your political party is wrong or ill-informed or maybe even immoral,
that's an unacceptable loss.
It's an unacceptable personal and social loss. The evidence threatens the integrity and the positive value of the group identity itself. The person isn't defending a Bronze Age text.
They're defending their right to belong.
They're defending their right to belong and to feel good about that belonging. The engineer who cuts off the conversation isn't defending his lack of information. He's defending his tribe's narrative. The refusal to engage becomes a mechanism of identity preservation. A defensive wall just goes up and it shuts down any System 2 scrutiny because the emotional cost of accepting the fact, the loss of identity coherence, is just too high to pay.
Now, it might be comforting to think these biases only affect lay people making emotional choices about faith or what to buy, but they systematically destroy organizational efficiency and rational professional decision-making too.
They absolutely do.
Let's look at the illusion of validity and expertise.
This is a devastating insight for professionals. The illusion exists because really high-level skills like evaluating a firm's balance sheet or diagnosing a patient or analyzing political trends, they often exist in environments that are fundamentally unpredictable.
Like the stock market or geopolitics.
Exactly. The exercise of the skill is real, the professional training is genuine, but the environment itself doesn't allow that skill to translate into consistent, reliable forecasting success.
Which explains the spectacular and very well-documented failure of most professional stock pickers to consistently beat the market.
The diagnostic for genuine skill is persistence and achievement. Can someone consistently outperform a statistical baseline, a simple index fund, year after year after year?
And the data says.
The data is overwhelming. The vast majority of stock pickers, both amateur and professional, fail to beat the market consistently over long periods. They are operating in a low-validity environment, but their belief in their own skill persists because they are exercising high-level training and generating these coherent, confident stories.
But the stories don't predict the future.
Not at all. The truth for most individual investors is that taking a shower and doing absolutely nothing would have been a better policy than acting on the sophisticated ideas that came to their minds.
And this professional illusion just feeds the overconfidence of pundits. Philip Tetlock's decade-long study on political experts is notorious for this.
Notorious is the right word. These highly paid, highly credentialed forecasters performed worse than monkeys throwing darts at a board.
It's the ultimate reality check for arrogance.
It is. And Tetlock found that the experts with the most knowledge, the ones with the most complex models, the ones who appeared most confident on television, were often the least reliable. They became what he called overly confident hedgehogs.
Hedgehogs, they know one big thing.
They know one big thing, and they fit absolutely everything into their grand, coherent theory, and they rigidly resist any information that contradicts their core model.
And why were the hedgehogs so much worse than the others?
Their enhanced illusion of skill made them completely resistant to admitting error. They were incapable of adapting quickly. Their confidence, again, just reflected the coherence of their elaborate internal story, not its accuracy in the real world. The most accurate forecasters, the foxes, knew many small things. They were willing to synthesize disparate data, and most importantly, they were comfortable admitting they were wrong and changing course.
Organizations are just as susceptible to this kind of delusional optimism, especially when they're planning big, complex projects. This is the planning fallacy.
The planning fallacy. It means that project plans, whether for a software launch, a construction project, or a merger, are always unrealistically close to a best-case scenario. And they systematically ignore the statistics of similar cases from the past.
We focus on our own plan, the inside view.
We focus exclusively on the specifics of our own internal plan, the detailed, compelling inside view, and we completely ignore the outside view, which is the base rate derived from historical data of other similar projects.
And there's a great anecdote about this from a curriculum development project.
Yes. The team estimated internally that their complex project would take 2 years. That was their detailed, compelling inside view.
Okay.
Then they consulted an expert to establish the base rate from other similar past projects, the outside view. The data suggested a 40% chance of outright failure.
Wow.
And an average completion time of 7 years.
2 years versus 7 years and a 40% chance of disaster.
The discrepancy was immense. But here's the punchline. The statistics were, quote, noted and promptly set aside.
Why? Why would they just discard data like that?
Because the inside view felt real. It felt detailed, emotionally compelling. They had names and steps and deadlines. The 7-year average felt abstract and insulting. They thought, our team is special.
We're different.
The planning fallacy thrives on that cultural optimism and the human drive to just start projects. It's a systemic organizational bias where confidence is constantly confused with competence.
But organizations can fight this. Gary Klein's pre-mortem procedure seems like a really powerful tool to force System 2 to wake up.
The pre-mortem is a critical managerial intervention. It's designed to mitigate this delusional optimism. So before the final decision to commit huge resources, the team gathers and the leader states the premise.
Which is?
Imagine that we are a year into the future. We implemented the plan. The outcome was a total unmitigated disaster. Please take 5 to 10 minutes to write a brief history of that disaster.
So what does that actually accomplish cognitively?
It legitimizes doubts. It gives permission for people to voice concerns that otherwise would have been silenced by optimism or the pressure to conform. It compels the highly confident System 2 to search actively and systematically for potential failures, risks, technical flaws, interpersonal conflicts that it otherwise would have overlooked because the narrative of success was so dominant.
It moves the conversation from, will this work, to why did this fail?
Which is a much, much more productive frame.
So our final cognitive hurdle is this intense bias for causal thinking, which makes it almost impossible for us to accept mere statistics or randomness. We actively resist the idea of regression to the mean.
We crave stories. We need stories with clear causes and effects. Regression to the mean is a purely statistical phenomenon. It just states that following an extreme outcome, either unusually good luck or unusually bad luck, the next outcome will typically be closer to the average.
Just because extreme luck rarely lasts.
That's all it is. But our minds struggle mightily with this because there's no satisfying causal explanation for it.
And the flight instructor story is the definitive managerial example of misattributing cause here.
It's perfect. The instructor noted a clear pattern in cadet training. When he praised a cadet for an unusually good performance, the cadet usually did worse the next time. But when he shouted at a cadet for an unusually bad performance, the cadet usually improved the next time.
So his conclusion was obvious.
His conclusion was that punishment works better than reward.
But the true explanation was just random fluctuation in statistics. It had nothing to do with his management style.
Exactly. He praised performances that were statistically lucky high points, which were destined to fall back to the mean regardless of what he did. And he shouted at lucky low points, which were destined to rise back up to the mean. He attached a causal interpretation, his use of punishment or praise, to the inevitable fluctuations of a random process.
And managers and organizations fall into this trap all the time.
Constantly. They misinterpret statistical noise as the direct result of their training interventions or their disciplinary actions.
And this preference for causal stories about the past leads directly to the massive professional flaw we know as hindsight bias.
Hindsight bias is the ultimate narrative fallacy. The ease with which we can explain the past makes us falsely believe that the future is knowable. When an unpredicted event happens, a financial crisis, a product failure, a political upheaval, we immediately construct a coherent narrative that makes that event seem predictable in retrospect.
We look back and say, I knew it was coming, or it was knowable all along.
And that language is so professionally dangerous because the core illusion is that we believe we understand the past much better than we actually did at the time. This belief constructs this pernicious illusion that the world is far more knowable and controllable than it truly is.
And that fosters overconfidence.
It fosters massive overconfidence in our ability to forecast the future, leading to reckless planning and a profound tendency to unfairly blame people for failing to predict the unpredicted. It stops us from valuing careful, non-causal statistical thinking, all in favor of a comforting but false, tidy narrative.
This has been a truly comprehensive deep dive into the architecture of our own resistance. We started with the engineer who valued meticulous data for his car but completely rejected it for his life. And what we've uncovered is that we are these incredibly complex beings, governed by systems designed for speed, comfort, and coherence. for a tidy world.
Not for effortful, rigorous logic.
Right. That moment of contradiction, that's the moment System 1 substitutes a comforting belief system for the strenuous effort that System 2 would require to actually engage with contradictory evidence.
And that substitution is the key insight. System 1 is effortless, it's automatic, and it's often highly confident because it relies on all these heuristics we talked about: representativeness, availability, anchoring, all of it underpinned by that drive for coherence through WYSIATI.
And while those shortcuts often work, they fail systematically in predictable circumstances.
They do. And when those circumstances involve our core identity or the perception of a painful loss, which is magnified by loss aversion, the emotional resistance just kicks in. Our rational moniker, System 2, often stops being a scientist and becomes an apologist, just defending the emotional preferences of System 1.
So overcoming these deep-seated biases requires a constant conscious mobilization of that lazy System 2. It means intentionally seeking out the outside view when you're making critical plans, actively fighting anchors in negotiations, and learning to accept statistical truths like regression to the mean, even when they don't have a satisfying story.
The ultimate challenge isn't ignorance of the facts themselves. It is the profound emotional cost, that perceived loss of having those verifiable facts conflict with the tidy, coherent story we have already built for ourselves, for our identity, and for our place in the world.